finding products, you know, what's been very telling is 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds that can't get it but got it from a friend and this and that. Like THCP, someone told me about that about 4 months ago. 18-year-old, you know, and I was just like, okay, and then now I see it like popping up on the map everywhere. But all jokes aside, the kids do sort of let you know where the trends are going. But what we have found is people like to start, especially here, I find that our typical customer, they're new to the alternative THC, so at first, one, they're very skeptical. Edibles, the whole thing, until we are a big component on giving out free samples. I think last year we did 25,000 free samples.
I got one of your samples.
We
I
clutter them
It's really good.
Like,
it is really good.
if I can say that was the best marketing money ever spent, with giving our actual product out to people, because again, Texas consumers, I found that they either smoke weed, need something to pull them over, or they're interested in looking into the market and trying some, you know, for good times or whatever it be for pain relief. And I've just noticed that I think you have to sort of be a little ballsy as far as like trying new products, but you know, whenever in October we saw Delta 8 was going to be illegal, we immediately said HHP or HHC, THCP, whatever the next alternative was, because the consumer, someone's going to fill that void eventually, and you want to be that person. So I think we're just in that industry where we constantly have to evolve, and there's not really an option. It's either fight or flight, you die. Right? So I think with us, it's just very important. We just keep going higher, because that's what the consumer wants. They start with Delta 8, they build their tolerance. Now we have Delta 9 gummies, but we did THCO, you know, or dabbled with that one, Delta 10, and then now HHC is our #1 seller, just because the strength is there. And again, the consumer is just evolving with us as well. So I think it's just very imperative that you sort of be rolling with the ball, never too far in front of it, just because in case something does come illegal, you don't put all your eggs in one basket and you're left out to dry with a huge inventory left over. But I definitely do find that Texas, you know, most people smoke. So the stronger strands definitely did it for us, and then just going more healthy alternatives. So live rosin rather than just pure distillate. If you have, you know, a supplier, if you have someone that has access to that little $500 different in a liter, I rather pay more for the rosin and give that to the end consumer, so that the experience is not only better, but it is healthier. It's a better choice for it, you know, more natural. My experience partaking.
I mean, that's what's fascinating about this industry, right? Is the consumer base can differ. It can be different. Like you talk about your consumer base really wanting and had an appetite for the high THC or the high Delta 8. I mean, is that what you're seeing, Shada, in your experience running and operating Restart CBD in Austin?
No, it's a delicate conversation. I might piss some people off. It might be Shelby. I don't know. You know, respectfully, there's different consumers, right? And so I think when you're looking at a market and you're looking at who the customer is, you are making a decision. I think to jump to the end is, you know, is any of this really safe for consumers? The question is, I don't know. I think as a cannabis person, first and foremost, you know, especially playing in conversations across the nation, there's a lot of attitude around the full plant, the actual plant, growing cannabis and realizing that everything stems from that plant. So naturally occurring cannabinoids versus synthetic cannabinoids. And I use the word synthetic very specifically because it can be a trigger word for some, but I don't believe synthetics are bad, especially if you're looking at the pharmaceutical industry. Synthetics is what gives you consistency. So the introduction of cannabinoids like Delta 8, HHC, THCO, THCP, they are made chemically, which is synthetically. Again, going to the end point, is this actually safe for the consumers? You know, it's a question that I wrestle with at my business all the time, because when we got in the industry in 2018, it was like, maybe CBD. Texas was like, okay, you can have hemp, you can have CBD, and we were like, we're gonna smoke it. We're gonna smoke the plant. The plant grows hemp, it goes predominantly CBD, low in THC, and Texas was like, whoa, we didn't know you were gonna smoke it, hence now this, you know, 2-3 year battle of smokable hemp, you know, whatever. But when I got in the industry, there wasn't all these other cannabinoids. Now as somebody who's actively paying attention, I'm in these conversations, I'm asking and looking at what my consumers are wanting, and I'm having to make a decision at the end of the day. Do I wanna sell those products? Is this good for the consumers, and is this a stopgap for legalization? So again, going back to my analogy, Texas is in a really interesting position. because there's not another state like Texas. We are the largest state in terms of volume of people who live in our state, and we're gonna be one of the slowest to actually legalize marijuana. So what does that do to the market? You're no longer having people growing cannabis, cultivating cannabis, beautiful plants, and saying, oh, I'm gonna extract this into distillate, or extract this into live rosin, turn it into gummies, turn it into topicals, turn it into insert, whatever. You're having people who are like, okay, well, my state says I can't grow it. It has to be capped at this. People want to get high. What else is there? What other cannabinoids are there? And so if you actually look at the chemical makeup of the cannabis plant, there's over 100 different cannabinoids. Some are non-psychotropic, like CBD. CBN could be maybe a little, buzzy if you want it to be. But then you do have these minor cannabinoids like HHC, THC, or THCP. I heard of another one, JHD or something coming up. To me, there's an infinite ball that you're gonna have to keep up with. And again, it's just, I'm privy to conversations. I was just talking with Jesse and a couple of us sit on this nonprofit board called Texas Hemp Coalition. It's one of the leading advocacy boards here in the state. And we're having a Texas Hemp Summit coming up in November. So if you want to get more involved in business, go see Jesse after. But we were talking about HHC from a cultivation perspective. Okay, if I'm a cultivator and I'm growing hemp flower, who's actually buying my hemp flower in Texas? The reality is people don't want it unless it's sprayed with Delta 8 or HHC. So that's hard if you're a cultivator who believes in the purity of the plant. Let's say then you are on the testing side. Can you even test HHC? I remember 2 years ago, you couldn't even test Delta 8 versus Delta 9 THC. So from a legal perspective, on a test result to a law enforcement officer who's like, you're selling marijuana, you're like, no, I swear to God, it's Delta 8. They can't even tell on a test. So when you have the introduction of all these new cannabinoids, how do you even regulate these cannabinoids? So those are just two examples of how do you plan for what products to put on the shelf. It's what is legal, what is ethical, what is safe for consumers, and the reality is we don't really know because we haven't been consuming these cannabinoids for long enough to test them in a safe environment for long-term consumption.
Right, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, what it comes down to is the federal illegality and the illegality in the state, obviously, right? So there is an appetite for people to want that psychoactive, a feeling that THC gives, so they're finding ways to synthesize the minor cannabinoids to get that feeling. And so that's my beef, is just the federal illegality of like we're chasing our tail here.
100%.
But I want to hear Richard's take. Yeah.
I was just going to say, keep in mind there's some ancillary federal stuff called the FTC and FDA as well, right? So, and that's beyond, that's outside of what we just discussed. But I'm sorry, what was your question again?
No, just if you have anything to add with what anybody said.
I'm not going to elaborate too much about that, other than the fact that, if you do have products, aside from the state and federal illegality aspect of it, depending on where you market your stuff, identify what some of the other risks are. I think I just briefly mentioned FDA and FTC, and even state level deceptive trade practices issues. Because if it's direct to consumer, it's a consumer product, so consumers could have rights for deceptive trade practices.
All right, well, let's talk now about, you have your product developed, you launched your go-to-market strategy, you're operating, running your business, it's growing, raising capital, especially with the current economic environment that we're in. I mean, Richard, you want to kick this off and talk about raising capital?
So raising capital, this is a big part of what I do. It's a big part of my world, is that it's very much of an art to raise capital. And I guess I wrote down a couple tips for you. And if you really have to think about raising capital, you're essentially asking somebody to give you resources to do what you want to do. That's all it is. You're asking somebody to give you resources to do what you want to do, but in return, you have to give them what they want. What is it that they want? So I think part of capital raising is you have to be able to tell your story. What is your story? What makes your story unique from the 20 other pitches they probably got that same day? How does your product or service distinguish itself? Maybe not right now, but maybe 6 months from now, right? It's the anticipatory aspect of what makes your service or product valuable to, not just within the industry, but some investors are looking at, well, how do I take this and make it global? How do I make it national? How do I take this and make it into a crossover into other industries like we previously talked about in healthcare, right? So there's different ways of looking at it. And you also have to understand that different investors will take different approaches. Different people have different appetites for risk. So really develop your story. What does that story really look like? Well, once you have your story formulated, start off with putting it to pen to paper and develop an executive summary. For those of you who do not know what an executive summary is, it's usually between 4 to 5 pages on average of clearly and concisely telling what your company does. Okay, it's really identifying what your product is, who's running it, what the purpose of your company is, and you're essentially giving somebody a 4 to 5 page summary of who you are and what you do. You also have to understand that they look at your company in terms of the type of value it's going to bring to them, because they may want to do something with your company that you don't really anticipate. I'll give you an example. Some of my private equity clients are very hands-on. They don't want anything to do with being on the day-to-day. They're looking for a really key management team. I have other clients that want to come in and just basically take over. It may not be your intention for people to take over to take over your company. So finding that initial cultural alignment is really key. Okay, if it's not culturally aligned, it's not a good fit, and you really should be fitting a square peg into a round hole. So here are my 5 tips, right? When you're raising capital. 1, you should identify who your relationships are. Tap into all your networks, because those are the low-hanging fruits. Whether it's friends and family or people you know that have money, tap into your network. Tell your story. Practice telling your story. So tip number 2, know your investors.